Large crowds followed Jesus. He turned to them and said, "If any of you come to me without turning your back on your mother and your father, your loved ones, your sisters and brothers, indeed your very self, you can't be my follower. Anyone who doesn't take up the cross and follow me can't be my disciple. If one of you were going to build a tower, wouldn't you sit down and calculate the outlay to see if you have enough money to complete the project? You do that for fear of laying the foundation and then not being able to complete the work. Because if anyone who saw it would jeer at you and say, 'You started a building and you couldn't finish it,' or the leaders of one country were going to declare war on another country, wouldn't they first sit down and consider whether, with an army of 10,000, they could win against an enemy coming against them with 20,000? If they couldn't, they'd send a delegation while the enemy is still at a distance, asking for terms of peace. So count the cost. You can't be my disciple if you don't say goodbye to all of your possessions. Salt is useful, but if it loses its taste, how can it be resalted again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the compost pile, so it's thrown away. Whoever has ears to hear this, hear this. Holy wisdom, holy word.
Good morning. You know, I love the inclusive translation that we've started to use because it doesn't use a lot of that patriarchal language of empire for the divine. However, it can tend to soften things. For example, our translation says, "If any of you come to me without turning your back on your mother and father and loved ones, you can't be my disciple." The word in Greek is miseo, which means to hate. It's where we get the word misanthrope, which means somebody who hates people, or misogyny, which means the hatred of women. So when we look at the original language, we see the directness of Jesus's language. So what does he mean? You have to hate yourself. Aren't we told we have to love ourselves, that God loves us? Why would Jesus tell us we now have to hate ourselves, not to mention our families and our possessions? I don't think, as some have suggested, he means to comparatively love him more than we love ourselves and our families. I think that's kind of trying to explain it away. I think he really means we need to cut ourselves off from who we think we are, so we can see through new eyes, the eyes of our supposed enemies. I've talked to you about this before, but there are 3 ways in which we typically try to define ourselves. The first is, I am what I do. I'm a pastor, you're a dentist. Something about our actions, our jobs, gives us our identity. That's why some people become workaholics. They can't imagine what it's like to just exist without doing things all the time. It's why some people become depressed when they retire. You all do not become depressed when you retire. You just get more active. But a lot of people wonder, who am I without my job? Who am I after I retire? Secondly, people identify themselves with their possessions. I am what I have. Look at this house I have. Look at this car. That's why we have so much consumerism. Luxury brands that are supposed to define us. I don't think anybody in this room has ever purchased a luxury brand, but you know what I mean. This is why Jesus says we have to renounce our possessions. Anything that could define us in that way. Not to mention the fact that if we're privileged to have abundance of possessions, we're supposed to share our goods. The third way of defining ourselves is, I think, something that we all fall prey to, which is, I am whom I related to. I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. I'm part of this family, I'm part of this clan, I'm part of this religious community. I am one of us. Jesus is being followed by a big crowd, which is not an insignificant detail. I am not sure following Jesus and being part of a large crowd are compatible. I don't know if you know that feeling you get when you're in a large crowd, maybe at a concert or a big church service or a rally. It's a kind of a high. It's this effervescent feeling. That's what my daughter calls it. Everyone's singing together. It's uplifting. You feel like you're really in the part of the group. And I'm not sure it's actually healthy spiritually. These big churches that attract large crowds, I often wonder, what are they offering? I'm troubled because in this story, Jesus is on the way to Jerusalem to be crucified. He's traveling on the road, as he often is in Luke's gospel, and all of these crowds are following him, hoping to get something from him, I think. Hope, healing, freedom from the Romans, and uplifting of their spirits. And he turns back to them and warns them about the cost of following him, how following him means divorcing yourself from everything that you think defines who you are. He says, be careful. You're starting off on a project like someone building a tower, and you're probably going to run out of steam when you find the cost of being my follower. Then he compares following him to waging war. He says, if you're going to go out in battle and you see the overwhelming odds against you, you're going to think twice. You're going to sue for peace before you get obliterated. These are the ways in which Jesus is trying to send people away. And yet most churches today are constantly trying to increase their number of members. We've fallen into a capitalist view of church, as I said last week, putting growth above all the other values, saying we've got to get more people in here. Well, how do you get more people to come? You give them an attractive message, a message of personal salvation, a message of personal holiness. Jesus is going to improve your life. You're going to be a better person. Jesus is going to help you with all your problems. You want to start a business? Are your grandchildren falling into sin? Are you lonely? Jesus will help you. Jesus will meet your needs for love, for community, for personal salvation. Is that what Jesus is saying? In this passage, he turns to the people and says, following me is going to cost you dearly. In fact, it will cost you everything. There's this TV show on HBO called The Last of Us. Nobody in here has seen it except for Elliot, and I don't even recommend it because it's one of the most violent shows, but it's actually based on a video game. So you're probably saying, like, how can a TV show based on a video game even be good? And you're probably right, 9 times out of 10, but not only did I watch The Last of Us, I loved it. I loved it so much, I even tried playing the video game down at my kid's house. I'd never really played video games before, and I got killed like 28 times. Elliot's like, he tried it too. And you just get killed multiple times, and then you just give up. The premise of both the game and the show is there's been a global pandemic, not a viral pandemic, but a fungal pandemic, in which the fungus cordyceps, which is a real fungus, has infected most people in the world and made them into zombies. The survivors, who are the uninfected people, have to deal with these fungus zombies who are trying to attack them so they can spread the fungus. They also have to deal with this militaristic authoritarian government that has taken over the world under the guise of defending people from the fungus zombies. I know it sounds terrible, but just bear with me. The plot centers around the main character, Joel, who has lost his family in the fungus pandemic, And he has to take this girl named Ellie across the country, facing many dangers, because Ellie is the only person to ever be immune to the fungus. And if he can get her to this medical facility that still exists, where there are these doctors in this medical outpost, they can find a cure. They can find a vaccine so they can cure the cordyceps fungus. I know you're like, where is this going, Pastor? Okay, why are you telling us about the zombie fungus apocalypse? But here's my point. So in this game and in this show, you're very attached to Joel and Ellie. They're the heroes of the story. And you're playing this game as them, and you're watching the show from their perspective. Joel ends up getting killed by a young woman named Abby. She brutally murders him, and she's the arch nemesis of Ellie. You then spend the entire show following Ellie, or playing the game as Ellie, trying to get Abby, trying to get her back. And all you want, she's the enemy, and you want revenge for Joel's murder. Now here's where the remarkable part comes in. Up until this point, it sounds like every other video game, every other violent show. They're good guys and bad guys. Joel and Ellie are the good people, and Abby and her cohorts are the bad people, and your goal is to fight them and destroy them. What makes this game and this show so remarkable is that when the second part of the game comes out, which is the third season of the show, it's from Abby's point of view. You are now playing the game as Abby. And the enemies you have to face and fight and destroy are Joel and Ellie, who were the good guys before. There's never been another video game to shift your focus like that, make you take on the role of the enemy, put you into the position of the enemy as a human being with family and friends and people that she loves. It utterly destroys the concept of enmity and otherness and the myth of redemptive violence, which is really weird in a violent show. Because suddenly you're looking through the enemy's eyes, and the enemy is you. When we give up our slavish attachment to the groups we normally identify with, the selves we normally identify with, and the roles we normally identify with, we may find ourselves in an entirely new place we could not even imagine when we started, where we actually see the world from the perspective of the people we thought were our enemies. But we must be willing to give up these ingrained roles that we are conditioned into by the domination system, which is a system of us versus them. The more we let go of attachment to these familiar roles, the more we learn who we truly are. This is what Jesus is saying you have to do to become his disciple. He says to the large crowd that in order to become a disciple, you need to hate not only your own family, but your own psyche. He uses this word psychos in Greek. You have to hate your own psyche, your own worldview, and everything you hold dear, everything you think makes you, you. If you follow me, it's going to cost you everything you possess, your very identity. So don't follow me thinking you're going to get something. In fact, following Jesus means giving up everything. I got some inspiration from our book club book, The Tears of Things by Richard Rohr, which I assume you're all reading. It's so good. And Richard Rohr, in his chapter on the prophet Jeremiah, who was an outsider like most prophets, Rohr says, the joiners and the belongers really have no need for grace or mercy. They imagine they got to the top by their hard work, group loyalty, and good behavior, by following the law. So they tend not to understand the totally unreasonable and irresponsible concept of grace. This is why groupthink and church loyalty are so commonly substituted for the love of God. Loyalty, says Rohr, is actually a form of codependency, giving us a warped sense of control and safety. Loyalty could just as well be to General Motors as to a church. It takes a prophetic vision to be able to see beyond that group loyalty and become a true disciple of Jesus. The prophetic pastor who wrote the actual book on the cost of discipleship, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was executed by the Nazis for resisting the Christian church in Germany, which had become merged with the Nazi Party, and he refused to participate. He would not join that group, even though his identity as a German Christian pastor was closely aligned with that group. We ourselves may find it necessary in the coming months and years to give up even the label Christian. Identification with Christianity, when Christianity is so allied right now with the domination system, with a regime of authoritarianism and fascism that is in power right now. When popular Christian music is sung in the White House to celebrate the destruction of the environment, to celebrate the disappearing of our immigrant siblings, to celebrate the war on kindness and empathy. Maybe it's time to rethink that label Christian. I don't know, maybe it's time to even shout it out more. I'm just not sure. But I know it's the culture of us versus them. Are you in or are you out? Are you in the right group that has divided the country and the world and gotten us into this situation? So how do we get out of our own psyche? How do we become better disciples of Jesus and continue following him on the road to the cross without watching The Last of Us, which, as I said, I don't recommend to you. Unless you have a strong stomach, then I recommend it. We can start by developing a healthy skepticism of over-identification with a group. We need to develop a sense of our own identity as who we are in God, who we are in Christ, a firm understanding of our own belovedness, not because of what we own or what we do or what groups we're part of, but because we are made in the image and likeness of God. As followers of Christ through our baptism, all of those other identities, as Paul says, have been crucified to us. And we no longer live by those identities that divide us from others, but rather Christ lives in us. And then we are in a radically new place. Letting go of these identities can feel like a death, but the more we let go, the more we understand that we are all one, all humans and our more than human siblings, the animals, the plants, the earth itself. So when someone else suffers, we suffer. No matter what group they belong to us, and we belong to them. We remember, even as we resist the systems of oppression and injustice, that our enemies have their own stories, their own families. And when we resist oppression, we are not fighting them. We are struggling for their liberation as well. May it be so. Our hymn of reflection is the summons. Gather 700 in the